Okay, I hope everyone can hear me and see me. We can now start with our first session for today. Um, we will hear several papers concerning use alterations and actual use of pots. So first speaker for today is Olga Baychev with her presentation, How Painted Pots Were Actually Used, a case study from early and middle Neolithic of the Central Balkans. So please, Olga, join us with the microphone and video.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Is everything okay? Can you see the presentation and hear me?
Yes, we can see the presentation, we can hear you, so I will mute my...
Okay, thank you, Jasna. I'm truly honored and happy, but also a bit nervous to be the first one to present my research at this conference, because finally I have the opportunity to talk with people who can really understand me. And being a pottery person, I think it is really important to have someone that you can talk to. And this is why, because there are so many shards and we spend so much time sorting them, recording them, counting them, that we sometimes forget what we are actually inventorying. And yes, we usually don't have this kind of outfit and hairstyle, but we usually do analyze kitchenware. And the research on early and middle Neolithic painted pottery from Starčevo culture from the Central Balkans is one of the examples on how we tend to forget that these vessels were actually used by the people in the past, and they are not just our tools for chronological sequencing. This kind of painted pottery, mostly because of its elaborated ornamentation, was usually considered as fine pottery and luxury prestige good. It was regarded as tableware used for food consumption or display. And I wanted to test these assumptions by better understanding its actual function and by analyzing use alterations on vessel surfaces. As you know, use alteration analysis is based on identification of traces and linking them to specific use activities. And my research was mostly based on methodology developed by David Halley and James Keeble. Analysis was focused on identification of traces, recording their distribution and their degree on internal and external vessel surfaces. And all analyses were done macroscopically. Special attention was given to better preserved vessels with entire profile, but all shards were analyzed, including small body parts. I have analyzed assemblages from five Starčevo sites in Serbia: Starčevo Grad, Grivac, Tečić, Pavlovac Gumnište, and Pavlovac Čukar. And these are the sizes of these assemblages. And as you can see, they are very different and they're all very small. All assemblages come from old excavations, except of the part of the assemblage from Pavlovac Gumnište, which comes from more recent rescue excavations. Assemblages mostly consist of shards, and almost complete vessels or vessels with entire profile were very rare. Majority of vessels are open bowls of different types on pedestaled or flat bases, and closed-shaped vessels with were present, but they were very rare. Now let's see what were the results of the analysis. So in all assemblages, only attritions were identified, and the absence of other use alterations indicate that most probably painted pottery was not used for cooking on open fire. Two types of attritions were registered: attritions made by abrasive and non-abrasive processes. And first we will talk about abrasive attrition. Abrasions are registered on different parts and surfaces of the vessels, And the most numerous were examples of vessels with rim abrasion that are present in all assemblages in these quantities. And these are some of the examples with different rates of abrasion of the rim, together with this chipped rim that indicates more aggressive contact with the abrader. This kind of abrasion could be the result of contact with the lid, so covering and uncovering of the vessel, and it can indicate that these vessels were used for storage, probably short-term storage of some smaller quantities of food. But the other possibility is that they were stored in an upside-down position. Abrasion of the interior side is registered only in Starčevo on 20 vessels, and those are balls of different types. On some better preserved vessels, I could see the pattern of abrasion, so I can distinguish center of the abrasion where slip was completely removed, and periphery with slightly less intensive abrasion, where individual marks could be seen in the form of horizontal scratches. There is also a group of smaller lower body parts with completely preserved slip on the outside and completely removed slip on the inside. And I think that they also present the result of similar activities, but that we only have a center of the abrasion surface preserved in these samples. This kind of abrasion, could be the result of steering or scraping of the vessel contents from its walls during mechanical food preparation or consumption. And judging by the intensity and the rate of the abrasion of some samples, these vessels were used a lot and in a prolonged time, not just once in these activities. But the scratches on the inside also could be the result of washing. Interior base abrasion is registered only in Starčevo, only on 2 pedestaled bases. On the upper one, you can see a bit more intensive abrasion with some pitting, but on both samples, there is a slight depression in the center of the abraded surface. And judging by the small size and shape of the abraded area, I think it could mean that these vessels were in the contact with some round and smaller abrader, maybe pestle. So these vessels could maybe were used as some kind of mortar for grinding of small quantities of some foodstuff. But we can also we cannot exclude the possibility that after the breakage, only these broken bases were used for this activity. And this particular vessel from Starčevo have a very interesting abrasion pattern. The abrasion rate is higher toward the center of the base, where it's really intensive, and there is one hole in the center. And I don't think that these damages are made by some food-related activity, food preparation or food consumption. But I'm really interested if you have any ideas and in what kind of activity this kind of traces could be made. So I think it's a secondary use of a vessel. Abrasion of the exterior wall in the zone of the greatest diameter is registered on 4 sites in these quantities. And this kind of abrasion is not present around the whole circumference of the vessel, and it's sometimes present on handles as the most protruding parts of the vessel. Exterior base abrasion is registered on 2 sites and in these quantities, and I have to highlight that these numbers actually reflect the number of bases registered in these assemblages. Because, for example, in Pavlovac Čukar, I didn't register any bases, and in Grivac and Pavlovac Gumnište, only 1. And in Starčevo, 12 out of 14 bases, and in Tečić, both bases were abraded. So we have to be careful with these numbers. And these are some of the flat and pedestal bases with abrasion. So exterior base abrasion and exterior side abrasion cannot inform us about the function of the vessel, but it can be informative about the frequency of handling and manipulating. And judging by the rate of the abrasion of these bases, I think that these vessels were moved a lot, that they were not static. Now let's move to non-abrasive attrition. It is identified as the erosion or pitting of the interior side, and it's registered on two sides, only on small number of vessels. And only in one case, one vessel from Starčevo, I could see the pattern of abrasion. So the upper part of the vessel had preserved surface, and this pitting starts 2 to 3.5 centimeters below the rim. Unfortunately, other samples are just body parts with preserved slip on the outside and pitting on the inside. And it's the same situation with these two small body shirts from Pavlovac Gumnište. So I cannot say that we have very strong indications for this kind of attrition in these two sites, but we have to consider what we have. So this kind of attrition could be the result of chemical reactions inside the vessel contents, such as fermentation of milk in production of some fermented milk products, and fermentation of cereals in production of some cereal gruels or beer. Some vessels have combination of different surface alterations, such as abrasion of rim and interior side abrasion of rim interior side and exterior base, abrasion of rim interior side and mid-exterior side, and abrasion of rim and erosion of the interior side. And some of these combinations could indicate that some vessels were multifunctional, or that they were used in different activities during their lifetime, or that they were used in some practices that included several activities, such as covering and steering, for example. So to conclude, although the sample is small and we have some methodological issues, I think it's fair to say that painted pottery was not just display pottery, and that use alterations indicate that it was used in storage for mechanical food preparation by steering or by grinding, and for preparation of food by fermentation. And the abrasion of the exterior surfaces indicate that it was moved a lot, that at least these vessels that we analyzed were not static. So with the most varied traces were identified in Starčevo, and this could mean that in this particular settlement, these vessels were used in a most varied way, but it also can reflect the size of the assemblage. But with all these results, I don't want to say that they exclude their use also in food serving and food consumption. And it also doesn't mean that they didn't have any social or symbolic meaning and value. We just now have some more context to consider when we are thinking about forming, maintaining, and changing of these meanings. And we also need additional analysis of intended function, experimental analysis, and organic residue analysis to investigate this topic further. And for the very end, I just wanted to bring a smile on your faces. I think that pottery people will understand me and say thank you.
Olga, thank you very much. You can now stop sharing. Yes. Thank you for this amazing work. As you know, I really love what you do, and I think this is very important research, because we now can see that painted pottery had its actual uses, not only for display. And now I have a comment of Michaela. Olga?
Oh, I'm here, sorry.
Okay. Okay. And Michaela wrote, many thanks for this interesting presentation, new data. Some painted sherds from the Romanian Starchevo sites of Skela Kladove were analyzed for organic residues. And she wrote also the reference, and the results showed that some of the painted that slipped had ruminant adipose fats. So this is thank you, Michaela, for this information. So maybe just as you said, maybe it is a good opportunity to run some other organic residues analysis for the material from Serbia as well. So we can now we have some analysis. We have evidence of milk and dairy products, but not on painted pottery. So maybe we should focus on this one and gather more information. Also, Gotze sends his compliments for the presentation. Thank you, Gotze. And Duška Urem also had a comment that there are similar examples on Middle Neolithic pottery in northern Greece. I think Julien will also have a presentation afterwards. Some similar phenomena are also observed in Bulgarian early and middle Neolithic. So this is a really good thing that we now have a really nice corpus of data, not enough, but for many sites. Darko Stojanovski also says that Starchevograd sherds were also analyzed for organic residue. Do you have any results? Oh yes, it was already published. Thank you, Darko. We will for sure we will check on that. Does anyone have any questions for Olga? No. Okay, thank you, Olga. Okay, Marie-Philippe. Do you know the proportion of vessels which have a combination of traces?
I don't know actual proportions, but it's not a great number of them. So and I think that in this case statistics it's not very helpful because I think it's in general there are a small number of vessels with traces. So I don't think that this quantitative analysis would mean anything in this particular.
Yes, I must agree with you, and I have my own comment because I also ran use alteration analysis, and it is a small number of sherds for early Neolithic. So for now, there is, in my opinion, also we cannot talk about the statistical relevant data, but probably in the future we will have more data and we will have some modeling concerned with proportions. Okay, do we have any other question? We have 1 minute more for Olga. If not, Olga, I thank you. Stay with us, of course. Please stop sharing now your video. And now I will ask our colleague Claire Burke with her presentation on integrated methodology for understanding the life cycle of Starchevo pottery from Svinjarečka Čuka, southern Serbia. Claire.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, we can see you. Please start sharing your presentation. Yes, we can see it. Please.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, so today I will be outlining some very preliminary observations about the potential function of early to middle Neolithic pottery from the site of Svinjarečka Čuka in southern Serbia. And this is based on examination of the pottery before our work was halted due to Corona. So during the Neolithic, an important element of the transition from mobile hunter-gatherers to more settled agricultural communities was the widespread adoption and production of ceramic containers. Within Balkan archaeology, traditionally Neolithic ceramics were examined in relation to the formation of typochronological systems and to define cultural boundaries based on the presence or absence of particular pottery types in different places. And this has given us a really good understanding of the repertoire of shapes in use at different sites. Additionally, over the last 10, 20 years or so, there's been an increasing number of really excellent raw material and technological studies of Neolithic pottery in different parts of the Balkans. And this has been accompanied by examination of use alteration, like we've just seen from Olga's work and from Jasna, and examination of residues in relation to diets and agricultural developments. And this work is challenging our understandings of Neolithic pottery, but such approaches are still not wide scale. So we have some gaps in our knowledge about crafting practices and vessel use, particularly in southern Serbia. So in 2019, the NeoTech project was born, funded by the Austrian Science Fund and led by Barbara Horrish. The focus of the project is actually the development and cultural context of two key technologies, lithics and ceramics, and I'm responsible for looking at the Neolithic ceramic element. My approach is framed within the concepts of habitus and the champ operatoire to reconstruct the sequence of practices and choices or decisions that potters were making to look at spheres of shared knowledge, innovations, and importantly, the repertoire of pottery that different groups were making. However, to fully understand the reasons why ceramic containers were made and so widely adopted during the Neolithic, we of course need to consider how they were used, and importantly, the possible relationships between their production and their consumption. And as I began to work with the materials from Svinja Chuka, I realized that this approach was possible at the site. So the site is located on a small elevated terrace near the Svinja River in Lebanon, and it was identified in 2017 as part of a survey during collaboration between Aurea, the Archaeological Institute in Belgrade, and the Archaeological Museum in Leskovac. Additionally, geophysical survey revealed several large sub-rounded features that could be pit structures, possibly for inhabitation, and these are comparable to ones found across Serbia and other parts of Southeast Europe, and we have the famous example here. So continuing the collaboration, excavations began in 2018, and although Bronze and Iron Age activity has disturbed some of the Neolithic archaeology, the excavations to date have already uncovered a large amount of Neolithic material culture, including pottery, figurines, cult tables, etc. Importantly, it's also uncovered evidence of inhabitation with a probable oven platform and an abundant amount of burnt daub, likely relating to dwellings. Naturally, as we're in the very early stages of the project and excavation, much of the material is still in a fragmentary state, and our mending work is ongoing. It's a huge job. But we have begun to refit profiles, and in addition, we have found a very small number of complete or almost complete vessels, and you can see an example here. The pottery contains barbotine painted impresso and linear incised surface finishes, and primarily consists of open, deep and more shallow bowls, small narrow-mouthed jars or jars with flaring rims, and then much larger, rounder jars with short collars or slightly flaring rims. And these are consistent with Starchvo 2 to 3 type assemblages. So although the planned analytical methodology of NeoTech will use thin section metrography, SEM, to look at raw materials and potting technology, my work is being expanded to include pottery function using 3D microscopy to look at surface traces, and we will have samples sent for organic residue analysis. Today, I am just highlighting macroscopic and morphological observations because obviously we haven't been able to sample the pottery for more instrumental methods. So the majority of the pottery excavated consists primarily of bowl and jar types, and these usually have a flattened or in some cases pedestal base, but they were clearly made to stand upright without support. The most open shapes are large conical shallow bowls, which usually have a barbotine or roughened exterior, a smooth interior and quite thick walls. These shapes are dominantly found in association with an organic tempered macroscopic fabric, and this may relate to trying to make them lighter to carry as well as help during firing. Now, the very open character of these conical bowls suggests that the vessels were involved in activities that required regular and easy access to their contents, such as food processing, preparation, or perhaps consumption, and their size maybe indicates it's for more than one person. The second most common bowl types are deeper and usually biconical with a narrower opening of around 15 to 20 centimetres. Their walls are much thinner and they are usually associated with a gritty or sandy fabric or a gritty and organic tempered fabric. They have usually smooth interiors, but we also have examples with burnished and slipped interiors. And this may have been to seal the interior wall if the contents were wet or liquid based. And this is something also suggested by use traces, which I will come on to shortly. The morphology of these vessels suggests that they were not used in the same activities as the larger conical bowls, but that their opening was wide enough for being able to scoop and access contents. As such, these may have been involved with food preparation and perhaps short-term, small-scale storage. The other main class of pottery shapes are jars, and these consist of two types. The first are large rounded jars with very thick walls. They have a short collar or slightly flaring rim and include horizontal loop handles around the belly. They're usually made with organic tempered fabrics, and again, this may be related to their weight and for survival during firing. The second main jar class are much smaller. They're usually narrow-mouthed and with thin walls made in a gritty fabric or sometimes gritty and organic tempered fabric. An unusual jar shape that we have, or what we're calling amphora, has a long funnel neck and a narrow orifice. But we only have one example of this so far, and it's highly decorated with painted decoration. Now, the large size of many of the jars and the narrow opening of some examples, such as the amphora, indicates that these their contents weren't regularly accessed, and the larger examples would have been very awkward and heavy to move on a regular basis. As such, these probably functioned for storage, and it may have been that the smaller, lighter types were accessed more regularly than the larger, bulkier versions. Additionally, some of the examples, particularly the thick-walled large types, include slipped or burnished interiors, and again, this may have acted as a sealant if the contents were wet or liquid-based. So looking at use traces, two types have been identified so far. The first are very distinctive pitting on the interior with a loss of inclusion and a loss of surface finishes. These so far have been found on a small number of deep bowls and some jar shapes, and it usually the attrition goes for about halfway or 2/3 of the way up the vessel, although some examples are also just below the rim. This pitting is consistent with a more aggressive chemical reaction, and as Olga said, this could be associated with fermentation or other acidic processes, and also has similarities to marks at other sites such as Blagatin, which is Jasna's work. The second use type relates to bowls, pedestal bowls and biconical types in particular. And these display abrasion very much on the base and sometimes 2 to 3 centimeters along the wall of the base as well. And this seems to relate to a mechanical action. And as Olga explained, this could be for stirring or scooping out contents, cleaning, that kind of thing. In addition to use-wear traces, we also have sherds with preserved deposits or residues on their interior. The least common are sherds with internal sooting or burnt residues. And indeed, evidence of burning or sooting either on the interior or exterior of vessels in the assemblage is very, very rare. The few fragments that we have belong to deep and biconical bowls associated with a gritty fabric, or just wall sherds, again, though usually associated with a gritty fabric. These burnt remains may relate to cooking activities, in which case perhaps having a gritty fabric helped with thermal shock. And it is notable that Neolithic pottery from other sites in places such as Anatolia have silicate-rich fabrics for cooking vessels. The most common deposit on pottery is this white residue on the interior. At first glance, it could be interpreted as post-depositional. However, it became very clear that other sherds and ceramic finds, such as figurines, didn't have these white residues, even when they're from the same deposits. And the geology, the soils at the site are not particularly calcareous. Significantly, similar white deposits on the interior of vessels are known from Neolithic sites in other parts of the Balkans and the Aegean, and work ongoing by specialists such as Eva Rosenstock has suggested in some cases this may relate to dairying processes or activities such as cheese making. And considering the increasing residue evidence for dairying across the Balkans at this time, that wouldn't be surprising. Other work has suggested that such white deposits could be related to the consumption of ground bone for nutritional reasons. And of course, we really have to consider the possibility that some of these may relate to craft rather than food activities, for example, in the production of particular coatings. And hopefully, residue analysis will elucidate the answer. So the preliminary work done so far has highlighted the potential of Starchevo pottery from Svinjarica for examining pottery function, and importantly, to look at the possible relationships between raw materials, pottery technology types, and the way they were used. So far, it's possible to intimate that storage, perhaps cooking, and other activities such as fermentation and dairying may have taken place, and future analysis will hopefully clarify that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, thank you very much. This was really interesting. I will now call the colleagues to ask their questions. I'm sure that many of them, oh, Dushka is thanking you. Michaela Spataro also, and she's asking, do you suggest a correlation between shapes, sizes, and fabric types?
Yeah, in some cases, obviously, we're really at the early stage of this work, and I need to sample pottery for petrography and things, but there does seem to be some correlation. So, for example, the grittier fabrics, when we've found things with sooting or burnt residue on the interior, they're usually this really gritty fabric. And also the larger vessels like the jars and these kind of conical bowls, that 90% of the time they seem to be this organic tempered fabric. So there does seem to be some correlation, but yeah, it needs more work so far.
Oh, that is great. We are eager to see your future results concerning this question. I would just comment a bit because I also, okay, Marie-Philippe White deposits, that is something I wanted to stress also, are sometimes interpreted as whitewash deposits in Iron Age context in France. Do you think that is possible in yours?
Well, so far, in terms of decoration, we've got white slips on the exterior of vessels, but not on the interior. And it could be that they could be decorative, but they don't seem to be always on the same types of vessels. And usually they're not on vessels that have any other form of decoration, apart from perhaps incised decoration. So it's hard to tell, but I think they're more to do with the use of the vessel rather than to finish it. But again, we need to do more analysis, and it's definitely something I'll think about.
Thank you. Michaela, some starchable shards had a white thick crust. The EDX results show calcareous deposition. This is great because I also noticed that many shards have this kind of deposits on the bottoms. In my case of blagotin, they are connected and related to the non-abrasive attrition. So probably it may be connected with some kind of activity or type of food, drink prepared. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That could be possible. This is why I'm really hoping we can get back soon and take some shards for residue.
Yes. Okay, Claire, thank you very much. I think that if we have several more seconds, kettles for later periods, yes, but this is early Neolithic. Okay, thank you, Claire. We will probably have more things to discuss at the final discussion. And now we have a presentation. Pauline Debel and Julien Viuguet. Our colleagues are not with us today because they're running their archaeological work in Senegal, but they were very kind and sent us their presentation. So I will share now my screen and we can see their presentation. I hope it will start in 2 seconds. I will have to share it once again because we did not have sound.
Useware studies have existed for a long time, thanks in part to the works of Griffiths, but have remained discrete up until the 1990s, thanks to the major works of Skibo, Kobayashi, Lully, and Vidal, to name a few. They have been slightly overshadowed by the appearance of organic residue analysis, but current trend seems to favor interdisciplinarity by combining useware and residue analysis. Useware studies can potentially bring information on the way of use and the content as early. Useware can be classified in three main categories: addition of matter, comprising charred residues and soot, modification of surface, such as cracks, and suppression of matter, such as abrasion and attrition. However, most of these categories can be divided in a unknown number of subcategories, as can be seen on screen with the chemical attritions. Today, we are going to talk about two case studies from both our study areas along the Mediterranean. From the late Neolithic. Although several scales can be used to study useware, we have mainly been using the naked eye. The study would benefit from further exploring the other two scales. From a methodological point of view, we believe the wear should be put in context, position of the wear on the pot, type of structure, type of site, etc., which would allow the identification of recurrences. The data also benefits from ethnographical, experimental, and ethno-experimental.
Hello everybody, so today I present case studies that I have performed on the early Neolithic pottery in southeastern Europe. And I will today show you how the study of useware allows us to reconstruct the carrying system. So as many anthropological studies have shown, the carrying system of persons, such as babies, as you can see here, or things, such as pottery, can vary according to the culture. So therefore, the carrying system of pottery can be used as a cultural marker to distinguish different human groups and potentially design some borders between them. Based on this observation, I have tried to reconstruct the carrying system of pottery during the early Neolithic in southeastern Europe. In this region, the early pottery assemblages are quite diversified because they are composed of ceramic vessels, transport pottery, cooking pots, and so on. So it was quite a great context to study. Quite a great context to study the function of pottery. One of my questions was to better understand the ways in which Neolithic people held, hung, and laid their pottery. In order to solve this question, I have studied unique pottery assemblages composed of thousands of well-preserved ceramic vessels. I have started my research in southwestern Bulgaria within the framework of a PhD under the supervision of Klaus Salamova. In this region, I have studied 7 pottery assemblages coming from Kovacevo, Lindenci, Brejani, Drenkovo, Vaksevo, Krainici, and Karanik. And then I continued my research in Thessaly within the framework of a postdoc fellowship under the supervision of Kostas Kotsakis. And there I have recorded 3 additional pottery assemblages coming from Achilleion, Melisori, and Araki. So in total, I have studied 10 pottery assemblages, and I have documented more than 2,300 vessels and 8. In order to reconstruct the carrying system of pottery, I have developed a new approach which combines decometry and useware. I have particularly recorded the shape, the size, the capacity, as well as the origin of ceramic vessels. In my case, the most of the useware were preserved on the rims, the lugs, and the bases. So I will show you through the example of Kovacevo the different ways the Neolithic people moved their vessels. So at the site, most of the pottery are not equipped with any lugs. So we can suspect that most of the vessels were moved using open hands. But around 10% of the ceramic vessels are equipped with handles or taps without abrasion. So we can, in that case, suggest that the pottery were moved. Some of the ceramic vessels are also equipped with perforating knobs, and in that case there is two main configurations. The first one is that the ceramic vessels are equipped with one horizontally perforating knobs, as you can see here. And in that case, the useware is generally really located on the perforation of the knobs. So I suspect that the pottery were hung using horizontal and vertical rubs, as you can see here. The second configuration is that the ceramic vessels are equipped with one vertically perforated knobs. And in that case, the useware is not only located on the perforation, but as well on the top of the knobs, the upper part of the knobs. So I suspect that the pottery were hung using wound vertical rods. There is a quite clear chronological evolution of the carrying system of pottery during the early Neolithic, at least in southwest Bulgaria, as you can see here, because there is a quite clear decrease of the vertical perforating knobs over time. There is disappearance of horizontally perforating knobs around 5,900 BC. We can notice as well the appearance of handles and taps at the end of the early Neolithic, around 5,700 BC. So a clear chronological evolution of the carrying system. There is also regional variation, because as we can see through the comparison between southwest Bulgaria and Thessaly, we can see quite clear differences in terms of pottery assemblages. For example, in southwest Bulgaria, the pottery which were moved using closed hands are much more frequent than in Thessaly. And we can see the same trend for the ceramic vessels which were equipped with perforating knobs. In southwest Bulgaria, they are really frequent. They are nearly absent in Thessaly. So we can as well see clear variation in terms of carrying system of pottery.
And I will now concentrate on how users can inform us on the nature of the content by using a case study from the late Neolithic of the south of France. A very important information regarding this region is that we are in a karstic context where almost no water can be found at the surface, which means the Neolithics had to fetch it in caves, mainly from water dripping from stalactites. Also, the pottery is solely tempered using calcite. Water dripping from the roof of the cave will normally lose its acidity, but in some specific conditions, it can remain acidic. Natural cave wares comprise random spots of dissolved temper from drippings, fully dissolved temper from submergence, traces of overflowing, and differentiated shards. Each of these wares have been observed in the cave of the Pearl. However, some pottery vessels also show traces of filling limits, which raised a lot of questions. Were they sealed and thus prevented from overflowing, but for what purpose? Did they contain something else? Around 200 pottery vessels are estimated in the cave of the Claw. They could not all be collected, as many were stored in the carbonate cushions. 70 were studied from a useware point of view. Out of them, 21 vessels showed a distinct filling limit, and they can mostly be found at the back of the cave, which further develops the specificness of the use. Some vessels also showed attrition located or attrition following fitting limits. When the rest of the wear identified as natural is put into perspective, we can see that the vessels bearing them can be found randomly in 3 groups of vessels found in the cave. Furthermore, by measuring filling limits, one can see that bigger vessels are on average filled to a fuller capacity than the smaller containers. One can wonder if the smaller pots were used to draw from the bigger pots. So what exactly was contained in? I have turned to the ethnographic data and found using Arthur's works that fermentation can cause chemical attrition. I have also turned towards experimentation and made 50 pots that I used 50 times to boil, roast, store, or ferment produces that were found in the archaeological record, or extract. I have also turned towards experimentation and made 50 pots that I used 50 times to boil. The fermentation of barley and honey were recreated once in 6 different pots. And this use successfully dissolved the carbonate temper, although it did not create any attrition. It is likely that time is a crucial parameter regarding information of chemical attrition. So hypothetically, the far back of the cave of Le Clos was used to store acidic and or fermented liquids of any sort, while the front was used to collect water dripping from stalactites. The interpretation is based on the context, static vessels next to water sources, and the fact that these pots were all located in the same spot of the cave, depicting a possible spiritualized area. Also the fact that the wear results from an acidic liquid and the chemical attrition can be ethnographically compared with fermentation wear. What's more, the experimental data showed that fermented beverage were a possibility. Of course, this study directly needs now to be confirmed by organic residue and starch analysis. So in conclusion, we hope to have contributed in the demonstration that use-ware studies of ceramic vessels bring many information on past practices. We strongly support their use in combination with organic residue analysis, starch and phytolist analysis. In the future, we wish to continue large-scale studies. We also wish to further build experimental and ethnographical reference collection and to further explore microscale observation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we saw presentation from our colleagues Julien and Pauline. Unfortunately, the sound was not very well, but this is not due to our problems with internet, but it was recorded that way. So I'm very sorry because of that, but I think it was worth it because the presentation was interesting. Okay, this is our first, the last presentation for our first session. So now we have a break until 12:30. You can join the next link in 15 minutes. So see you